Oh, we're live. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I expect Angela to be here. Sometimes they keep her late. She's pouring asphalt on road work, and she got off late tonight. She'll be here shortly. Uh, and we're going to have a special guest, a Green Party member who is on the Minneapolis City Council, which announced, at least 9 members of it announced on Saturday at a demonstration in Minneapolis that they were going to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department and rebuild the whole public justice system from the bottom up. And so we'll be talking with Cam in a little while. I've been talking about how the 2 governing parties in this country are presiding over a failed state because they can't handle the coronavirus crisis. We don't test, trace, and isolate like every other organized country does. So the pandemic continues, 4% of the world's population, 30% of the deaths. And Trump is incompetent, indifferent. Biden's mostly invisible. And when he pops his head up, he's incoherent. He's not pointing in a clear direction. And then the last 2 weeks, the centuries-old pandemic of racism is now there for everybody to see as well. And so people have been out in the streets saying, hey, Angela, just introducing the topic tonight. People are out in the streets demanding justice. And demands are starting to be put forward. And now, rather than just telling the people that are in office and power, we want justice, it's time to get organized and tell them what justice looks like. And so that's about formulating demands and targeting the people we're trying to make the changes. So, for example, I was talking with Ralph Nader the other day, and he said, they should stop surrounding the White House. Trump's not going to do anything. They should go over to Congress and put the heat on them. And we do have some movement from Congress. The Democrats have come out with a bill with things like barring chokeholds, requiring body cams, maybe getting rid of qualified immunity so that people can sue police officers for civil remedies. And even today, there are reports that the Republicans are saying they got to get in on this, despite Trump's inane and insane and mean-spirited attitude that the way to deal with these protests is just suppress them with the military. And even the generals are saying, no, that's not what we do. And then the movement's putting up the demand, defund the police, which becomes a question, well, how much? The idea is to get more money into the services that people need. Instead of sending the police to deal with the homeless, let's get them homes. But say we cut the police budget 75%. Is that going to be, how many homes is that going to build? I think we need a Marshall Plan for the cities, particularly the communities of color in the cities that have been excluded, discriminated against, and disinvested from for decades. We had the Carter Commission report in '68 saying white America is implicated in the ghetto. And since then, we've had neoliberal austerity and privatization. And so it's even got worse. There's a call for demilitarization. A lot of the peace groups are saying, take money out of the military budget and put it in these community needs. And then there are more radical demands, and Cam Newton will be on shortly to talk about that. Dismantle police departments and rebuild the whole system from the bottom up with the community involved. And then, of course, what we've been talking about, community control of the police. Elect a commission that represents us, that can hire and fire the police chief, investigate and discipline officers. They negotiate the contract for the police unions, and really have sort of police work for us. Right now, they're self-policing. Police unions have a lot of power over the politicians that appoint these powerless review commissions and oversee these reforms that give training. And Minneapolis has done a lot of this, and look what happened to George Floyd. So that's one thing. And one thing personal to me is the Johnny Gamage law, which would require federal investigation and prosecution when the civil rights of a human being are violated, including bodily injury and death. And that's named after Johnny Gamage, who is from the neighborhood I'm sitting in. He was a cousin to Ray Seals, who was also from here, at the time a defensive tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Johnny was driving through the Pittsburgh suburbs on his way to Pittsburgh to see his cousin. and he got stopped in a traffic stop, and the end of it was he was strangled to death. He couldn't breathe either. And people have forgotten about Johnny, but we haven't. If you look online, Johnny Gammage, JONNY GAMMAGE, and you'll see a good article about what we proposed by the late Reverend Larry Ellis, who was a Green here in Syracuse. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Angela, you just got in. You want to add anything?
Hey Howie, this is exactly, I was just on Michael the Mayor's live stream. He's running in Salt Lake City. This is exactly what we were just talking about. So I'm very, and he was very excited about what's happening in Minneapolis and the discussion that's going to come out of this too. So I think a lot of people are waiting to find out how this is going to shake out.
So yeah, Cam should be here just any second. So as soon as we see him, there he is. How you doing, Cam?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good, good. So just briefly to introduce you to folks, you're a Green Party member of the Minneapolis City Council, and I know you've been working on the issues of police misconduct and the problems that the communities face dealing with the police before this whole uprising broke out, and that you were there on Saturday with other city councilors, a veto-proof group of councilors that could get this dismantling and rebuilding of public safety in Minneapolis going, whatever the mayor says. So with that, why don't you tell us, what you've been doing, what's going on now, and what the prospects are, and then people can ask you questions.
Well, as you can imagine, things have been quite climactic in the city here. I'm sure everybody out there has heard the news and the stories. We were all incredibly devastated by the police murder of George Floyd, and we've been recovering from that. It was just heartbreaking. And as somebody in government, as somebody who oversees employees of the city of Minneapolis, it was especially devastating. It's exactly the kind of thing that we don't want, something that's completely preventable, and just unbelievable to see that. But indicative of things we've seen elsewhere in the country, similar, not only indicative, and even in the city of Minneapolis, and something we've been grappling with for a long time. And of course, following that, there was demonstrations, which I participated in that evening, and then there was civil unrest. We had some major fires right in the ward where I represent. So we've been very busy dealing with those repercussions, working with the community, trying to see how we can heal from this and move forward. We had memorial services that have come by recently, and I think now we're poised, I think, to make some really significant reforms. I think it was striking how many council members who weren't necessarily interested in making deep structural transformative changes to our public safety approach are now willing to get on board and to do that. And of course, we're having a citywide, community-wide conversation about it. Very big contrast to where it all started back when I first joined the city council in 2006. I think we still hear the vestiges of that. But at that point, to talk about nonviolent approaches to solving safety issues wasn't heard of much. Law and order was kind of still is quite a strong approach that people see as we have to take that. But I think what became crystal clear in this whole process in Minneapolis is that the militaristic warlike approach that our police have taken in this country ever since their formation, and I think the police started in Minneapolis 150 years ago, is absolutely what we don't need. And we got to see it on display, not only in the tragic incident that happened on Memorial Day and the murder of George Floyd, but also in the police response to the protests and the way they responded there. And so we're hoping that we can make some big changes now. I'm happy to take more specific questions if folks have them, or I could just go on and on.
Well, now I'm looking in the chat, looking for questions.
I have to say, so while you're looking for questions, we made a intentional commitment to dismantle the police department and build something new in its place. And that's easier said than done. But we really have the imaginations going of the people of Minneapolis, and they're looking at all sorts of options and possibilities into the future. Sorry about that noise. That's me. Which is striking, and it's very, very different. And that's really what we have to do, is start imagining what we want. And we're starting a big process here. And it's going to be really critically important that if we're going to be able to do something new, we need the support and the interest of the nation and even the world. And that's one of the reasons I think why we're able to take this move, is because there is that. All eyes are on us, and there's hope that this could be something we could do and make a big change and show how we can have a new kind of community-oriented public safety approach that doesn't include weapons and police and law enforcement and all the oppressive strategies and tactics that have been taken over the years that we all know feed into the new Jim Crow and the mass incarceration, and are all based on racist premises and white supremacy. So we'll see, but we need experts, we need people with ideas, and we need everybody outside to get engaged as we're trying to come up with what we can do new and different here. And there are lots of ideas floating around.
So Cam, I don't know if you can see the question from Forever Phoenix. Hi from the Second Ward, Cam. Do you and the other city councilors foresee retaliation from the Minneapolis Police Department?
Well, there's concerns about that. And I've heard other councilors or council members worried that they're not getting police coverage. I think that's going to be an issue. You know, we have really big problems with our police union right now, too. And this is an interesting position for a Green to be in, because we are right now very interested in somehow decertifying that union or having it taken out of the picture. But there's certainly labor law, and we want our employees to be able to organize and all of these things. But another thing that happened in the last week is virtually all the major unions in the state came out speaking out against the police union and saying they don't feel that that's a legitimate, and they call themselves the Police Federation. They don't even call themselves a union, but that they don't see them as a legitimate union, and that the Federation has never stood with them in any of their struggles, and they have no intention of standing with the Federation, if that makes sense. So that was very powerful too, and it shows that the tide is turning, and there are more mainstream voices that are coming on board to do this. But I guess there are concerns. I'd say there's more concerns of individual anger and retaliation. Part of me is hoping that as different officers who are still here, so people should know that the police department is in our charter. In the city charter, we even have a minimum number of officers based on population that we're required to have. So this is going to be a long process, and getting out of even a union agreement is a long process, and it can go to court, and there can be arbitration. And so we're like, there's lots of challenges out there that are ahead of us. But I, and my maybe overly optimistic belief, think maybe there's a message being sent here. So some of these officers who are most upset or disgruntled or likely to retaliate on their own individually might decide to look for work elsewhere. But we will see, you know, in the meantime. But yes, that's a legitimate thing to be concerned about. And I've heard other people just wondering, even if it's just slow down, not responding, that kind of thing. I also think there are other officers who are just trying the best to do their job. They're profoundly ashamed of what they saw occur in that video, and it was never why they decided to do that kind of work or get involved in that.
So go ahead.
Do people get to speak, or I'm just going to read this?
I thought Angela was about to.
All right, Angela can answer that first.
I was going to, but I didn't want to interrupt you, Cam. Sarah Snyder is asking us, I'd like to hear each of you talk about alternatives to policing that you're excited about, please. I mean, one of the things, and I saw this in the chat, and one of the questions that was moving around there is and I would imagine in Minneapolis particularly, y'all have, I know people who are on the ground with Black Lives Matter in Minneapolis. One of the folks in the comments asked, have y'all, have you reached out to Black Lives Matter? And reading this question, I'm thinking of not only our policy, in our platform, but also Black Lives Matter has an invest, divest policy around community control of policing. And one of those things that is most exciting to me is the possibility of putting control of the community into the hands of the people, and also ways to use money that has been, divested from policing, to build up and lift up communities. So those things are exciting to me.
Why don't you go ahead, Cam?
Yeah, I think those are excellent ideas. And I will say that even the statement that was made on Sunday by council members, that was really begun and drafted by community leaders in there and some key organizations. Black Lives Matter is connected in the group. We may not have the strongest organization right now locally, but we had the Black Visions Collective, Reclaim the Block, MPD 150, and some other groups that were really coordinating that whole statement, and are actually wanting to lead in a community dialogue of what could happen. I'm trying hard to look at my role as a council member who can do legislation and understands a charter and our code of ordinances and a contract with the union, and be ready and to offer ideas and be supportive. But really, we're trying to let Black, Indigenous, people of color lead the effort, and the community help lead the effort, and they're doing that. Lots of the ideas that are coming up are probably ideas and things that have been tried or in little pieces all over the place. In fact, the last few budgets, we've tried to move money. I will say that when I got on the council, I pushed, actually, I was taking Natalie Johnson Lee served on the council before me, and she was a Green, and she'd started work on a youth violence prevention plan by looking at violence as a public health problem in 2006. And it wasn't getting a lot of traction. Then she didn't win her election, but I did, and I picked that up. And we've been able to expand on that in the point where we have invested in outreach into communities where there's risk. We've invested in ways of identifying high risk and low risk. We've invested in group violence intervention, so we can find people who are deep into this and have a wraparound services and help them find a pathway to healing and to get out of it. We've also more recently pushed co-responder idea that you have mental health professionals going out on emergency calls. We've had trouble getting them to be the first responders, and I think we're going to get to make further that way, but we've got small little teams of them. We also did a program where we have youth development workers who work downtown. We had concerns about our downtown area and the knee-jerk reaction kind of the biggest businesses with security there, and the police department was clamp down. And we were able to bring in youth development workers both to help businesses understand youth, but then help to work with youth to find out what can you do downtown and how can we mitigate this. And those investments really, I think, paid off enormously. So by seeing how you can invest in those kind of interventions, responding to emergencies, maybe, and even, I just want to say there's these upstream problems that we have to deal with. So 90% or roughly is what I'm hearing even nationwide. Police calls are related to something like chemical dependency, mental health issues, something that isn't a critical emergency. There is nobody threatening anybody's life necessarily, but they need some help and they need it right then. And so first of all, we can try to look upstream and say, what can we do to make sure everybody can get treatment and access to resources that they need to be healthy and not addicted to drugs. Homelessness is also a big problem. So maybe we need teams who go out and are doing homelessness prevention work or support work that aren't the police. because a lot of times the police end up getting called, and sometimes it turns out to be very ugly. So there's investing in how do we address those bigger causes maybe of crime and problems, and how do we respond to them more appropriately. So there's lots of ideas. And one thing that's come up recently is, what if you could, instead of have police patrolling the area, you could actually invest in community members who live in the area, get some training, certainly have a cell phone, and they end up kind of be the stroll patrol or the community watch. And it's not the same as the police, but they can tap into more resources then. And then we're also looking at what happens when you call the emergency number 911. Some cities have this already, but why don't we give somebody the option of identifying, I only need the fire department to come. Yes, it's an emergency, but the fire department is the one that should come, or the mental health emergency responder, or an ambulance. And so that way it gets sorted out better, and we don't necessarily need to send somebody with a gun and a taser and mace and handcuffs out there. I think people do recognize, and this is the discussion we have to keep having, is what are the essential functions that law enforcement generally is performing, and what do we need? Because we're going to find people who say, if there was a rape, we need it investigated. We want justice for these things too. So, and then it becomes, well, who does that? How many, and how are they trained? Do they work for the city? Or who do they work for? So it's very complicated. But those are some of the, I didn't want to segue all the way back into we still need cops, but I kind of did, didn't I? And I don't know that they have to be cops, but somebody who maybe can intervene at a different level than all the other things I talked about. But those are some of the pathways we think we can get around this. And we'll see.
Yeah, I've been looking at the statistics on, what the police actually do. And based on the Vera Institute for Justice, they looked at FBI statistics and national surveys, and they found that police, about less than 5% of their work deals with violent crimes. And then another less than 13% deal with serious property crimes, like robbery and carjacking and that kind of thing. So let's say you scale back police budgets for those, you bring an armed officer to deal with the violent crimes and the property crimes, and the investigative and forensic people to find out who did it. Because a big issue in a lot of these communities that have been over-policed on non-criminal issues and low-level offenses, and just harassed and exploited for fines that they can't afford, and that's why they resent the police. You just bring the police in for those serious crimes, but people in those communities, one of their complaints is, when we call, they don't come when it's serious. And then when the crime is over, they don't really investigate for us and find out who did it. And so the statistics I looked at on those kind of crimes, the police are only able to clear with the rest 25% of them. So suppose we cut back 75%. And then for the homeless, we find homes. And for the drug addicts, we get them treatment instead of, a criminal charge. And for people with mental health crises, we send in mental health experts to deal with them, to help them, instead of a police officer that doesn't know what to do. He's got a gun and a badge, and that's all he knows what to do. But even then, that's not enough to solve these problems, which is why I think we also need to demand that the federal government, I talked about before you came on, Ken, we need a Marshall Plan for the cities. And, what we're campaigning for is the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal that includes, for example, $2.5 trillion over 10 years to build 25 million units of public housing so that everybody has an affordable option, and invest in mass transit so people aren't isolated, a job guarantee, a guaranteed income above poverty. We can't do that even if we take 3/4 of the police budgets in our cities. It won't build enough housing. It won't employ enough people. So at the local level, we need to reimagine a public safety system, but we also got to get the federal government to put less into the military and more into our communities. And one thing about the policing, it's so militarized. A lot of these guys are Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, and their idea is they're doing the same thing they did there, search and destroy or search and capture. And that's not being a peace officer, that's being militarized. And we don't need an occupying force, we need a public safety force. So I think those are some of the things we need to talk about. So I think another question popped up.
Excellent.
Jason Justice wants to know, can the mayor of Minneapolis stop you, Cam?
Good question.
Well, that's a good question. Probably can either be more of a cooperative force or more of a negative force. I think what we'll ultimately need is some part of this is a change to the charter. There's two ways to get there. One of them includes a unanimous vote with the mayor signing it, so he could stop that. But the other way is to put it on the ballot and let the people decide, which in this case probably makes more sense anyway, because this is a big deal. So that's what I'm looking for, is how we can have something on the charter that would take the police department potentially completely out of the charter. I'm even floating ideas about maybe we should create another department of I don't know what to call it. In my green kind of hippie past, I think we should call it a Department of Peace, just like a lot of us have been saying we should have at the federal level. I mean, why is it defense? Why don't we actually have a proactive Department of Peace? So imagine that on the city level, where you could really consolidate the experts and the resources and say, our primary objective here is to prevent crime and heal from it and all of those things, so that we could implement these ideas. Put that in the charter instead, because I think it will really help people get their head around this if they know what we're actually funding or what we're investing in if we're divesting from this issue of public safety. And then they'll feel some reassurance and safety from it. But I think that we can do this either by winning the mayor over, but also I think we'll need a charter change, and we can put that in the charter. I have to say that the mayor has moved quite a bit, as my colleagues have, in the last few weeks. Last budget proposal, there was a big battle about more money for the police department. And it was more of a, how much of the increase can we, diminish? But I think it's going to be different now. I think there's an awakening all over the place. But the mayor's not necessarily maybe on board with everything. But I actually am hearing more unity among us electeds in City Hall than I ever have before, and more unity around this idea of building something new and deconstructing something old.
This is Andy Ellis. How do you maintain the power to defend the dismantling so that cities like Baltimore can adopt dismantle and rebuilding public safety under community control? That's interesting.
That's a big question, and because I've never gone through this, I'm not exactly sure how. But already we can see that people whose fears are rising up. I'm sure business will rise up. One of the things I'm worried about is there'll become so many divisions in our community, because sometimes we talk about different parts of the city or different community groups as being all like-minded and united, but we don't. So you can pick any ethnicity you want, and there's going to be divisions on the spectrum, and there's going to be fears about losing the police, and there's going to be cheers and hopes. So we are already seeing some of that happening. And it happens sometimes when the boldest statements get made, that there's this reaction. So I'm really trying to help everybody see we can kind of, I guess not with social distancing, but we can theoretically hold each other's hands and walk into this together and come to some consensus about big changes we want to make, because I think people want to make the big changes too. But it's going to be difficult, and that's sort of why there's maybe more of a burden, especially if Minneapolis seems like it's out front of Baltimore or something, even though I'm sure we're going to be looking at Camden. We're going to be looking all over at what other, in Europe or whatever, what other people have done in other places. But I appreciate that, because we'd like to make it look like it was successful and like all of us come out of it feeling good in the end, so more people, and that it's a real transformation, so that others can then follow and say, well, look, they took, and maybe it'll be that way along the way. Look, Minneapolis took these 3 steps. We could take those 3 steps. Their people liked it, and it didn't have all these bad repercussions. So, but we'll have to listen to the naysayers and the people with their fears and worries too, so that they can bring them along. It's going to be a trick.
Hey, Kim, I got a question for you. Have you studied what Gail McLaughlin, the Green Mayor of Richmond, California, did between 2006 and 14 with the new police chief, Chris Magnus, she appointed? Because a lot of their policies are similar to what we've been talking about.
No, barely. I heard about it, but I'm going to.
Okay,
Yeah.
I got your email. I'm gonna send you a bunch of stuff.
Good.
People should look that up. Steve Early is the guy, if you want to go on Google, who's written some good articles about the reforms they made there. I think it's the best example. Still needs more to be done, and she's no longer mayor, so there's been some retrenchment. But during that period, they lowered crime, and they got the police to do peace building and building relationships and solving problems rather than harassing people with all these tickets and just trying to arrest as many people as they could. So promotion was based on problem solving and they all had to walk community beats. Half the force quit because they wanted to do what they'd done in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so Chris Magnus was able to rebuild the force. It went from 20% to 60% people of color. A lot of women came in. And actually, the president of the police union lives in public housing in Richmond because they let the officers live for free and the city pays for it. And so very different culture there than in most police departments. So I'll send you the information.
Good. That'll be something good to look at.
So next, oh, you going to do it? Go ahead, Angela.
I was gonna say I took the last one. I can do this one if you want me to.
Go ahead.
Matt Peters is asking, what role could psychologists and social workers play in a new plan for response to crises? And y'all answered that a little bit earlier. Like, what you were saying, Cam, about having, in your restructured idea of first responders, these are the people that come out when there's a mental health crisis, or you're not sending armed police. And I thought that was absolutely perfect and appropriate. So if you want to expand on it.
I think they can play a huge role. I think they could become more proactive in terms of doing the outreach and solving problems. So we talk also a lot about with psychologists in terms of helping those people who are working for the city and who are trying to make some kind of a change. So we actually need a better understanding of how we can help people who want to do this kind of work be successful or not do this kind of work, which is a huge problem we have with law enforcement, and even identifying somebody when there's an early red flag and paying attention to it so that they don't keep doing this kind of work. So even if they were unarmed and doing, a stroll patrol, or if they were paid at maybe at a higher level and in a different tier to actually do emergency responses, like Angela was saying, they should also be vetted. They should be trained. So psychologists could be really helpful in all of that. But also social workers could be enormously helpful if they're trying to actually solve the problems and find out what people need and then getting the resources to do that. So if you have a homeless outreach team, that would be absolutely fantastic. But also, social workers, if somebody needs chemical dependency or if they just need jobs and all of those kinds of things. So I think that could be a key. Those could be key areas to invest in. Absolutely.
And just to interject real quick, I'm from your neighbor state originally. I'm from Wisconsin. I know Minnesota real well. And y'all, the members of your transit union there are members of the union that I used to be the legislative director for.
Oh, wonderful.
So I got a lot of love for them. Just thinking about the fact that in, I want to say it was 2015, a young man in Madison, Wisconsin named Tony Robinson was having a mental health crisis, and he was murdered in the hallway of his home by the police. And one of the things that people were asking, and I don't know how far it even got, was why aren't there people on forces who can come in and intervene in a situation like that, rather than a police officer who, someone makes a move and they jump for their gun. So I'm really gratified to hear that myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we've had instances here too where people were killed because police didn't understand. and they couldn't necessarily make a diagnosis. Oh, this is autism, or this is depression, or whatever it might take. So, yep, we need somebody with a different level of skills and training to help in those instances.
So Sarah Snyder says, second time, thanks for answering my question. On a related note, are you concerned at all about a power vacuum of sorts occurring that leads to an uptick in private security at Target stores and so forth? And I'll just add a little bit to that.
Yeah.
They got rid of the Camden Police Department, which had a high murder rate, merged it into the county force, and the officers, they were being paid $18,000 a year without a union. Now they've got a union back. And there are reports on it. And some say, you know, with community policing and crime rate has gone down, it's been good. But another thing not so good is that most of the officers are white, as opposed to what they had before in Camden. So that's another case we need to look at. So just adding that to the question.
So this idea of a power vacuum is interesting. And there is some concern of it. One thing that we had been doing, and we changed since this, just since last week, we've been requiring clubs, bars, places to hire Minneapolis off-duty police officers as part of a management plan. So if you can imagine, a club's got a lot of problems and there's been a lot of calls to it. And sometimes the business licensing officials want to come in and say, you need a safety plan and let's see what it is. And and as part of your safety plan, you need security. Well, so we would require them to have Minneapolis police officers. I'm not exactly sure why. I think it was traditional. They're effective. It's all part of this old-fashioned, what I hope someday will be old-fashioned response to problems, is you get the kind of militarized law enforcement agents who have all the powers to arrest people there. We now said you don't have to do that anymore, because in response to the murder of George Floyd, we had businesses asking us, you can't make us do this anymore. We actually had the University of Minnesota cut all ties with our police department, who had been helping with bomb squads and other things like that for big events, and had been servicing. So businesses were also interested in that, so we're allowing to do it, but it is creating this opening for private security. And I'm a little concerned about what it might mean. And I will actually tell you a very small story, but there was a fourplex not far from my house. And while the rioting was going on and it was clear that police weren't able to protect everybody and we were all watching out for one another, they decided to hire a security firm from out of town to I think, stay in one of their empty units. And these three people were performing security, and they started walking the alleys, and I got calls from neighbors who didn't like it and were concerned about it. They even overreacted by taking the air out of tires in a strange car that turned out somebody on the block had bought a new car. So they were worried. We were all worried about strange cars during that time, as you might imagine, and we had a lot of people coming from far away to get to our city to do damage to it. So it's a little bit understandable, but that just really made it clear that there will be a temptation not only for private security, but also for individuals to try to do their own security. And we saw little waves of this vigilantism that was creeping in too. So that is a serious concern. If people feel like they can't count on an organized, government community response that's going to be effective, what would it mean if they took it into their own hands? And if somebody went too far, that could cause enormous damage. Another case in point was we actually had a death at a pawn shop during the looting, where a pawn shop worker shot someone who came in to take things from the store. And clearly was not a life-threatening situation. That person has been arrested. But that was a death, and it was a death kind of because somebody was taking law into their own hands, or however you want to say it. So that's a serious concern, and that's one of the other reasons why we don't just want to bring everybody along because it's the right thing to do and we'll have a good consensus solution in the end, but we want to make sure that they're not overreacting from unrealistic fears, and that we as a community can solve the problem and work together, and people don't feel abandoned and end up overreacting. So managing those private security issues and seeing their credentials will also be really important, because we certainly don't want private security people ending up because of implicit bias and racism or whatever reasons, killing people or whatever, harming people.
So Carrie Converse asks, what about enlisting the help of good officers to start a dialogue about solutions? Remove the union, but workers with those proven good records and community involvement.
I think that's an outstanding idea. And I think when I talk about trying to find some common ground and go into this together, that will be something to look at. There's actually nationally a lot of former law enforcement people who have a lot of great ideas and work on it. And as somebody who's been on the city council now for 14 years, I can rattle off police officers who I think are just amazing and have done outstanding work, and I would work with, and they're compassionate and they're loving and they love the city and they love the people of the city. And so what would they be interested in? And I will tell you, even if we came up with a new system and one of them applied to be part of that in the new role, or if it was a new department, they could be very well qualified. I mean, we have officers who probably have advanced degrees in psychology and sociology and social work, I'm pretty sure. But I think that's a key thing, and it could also help us prevent making other mistakes. I will tell you though, me saying that will make me a little bit unpopular with some people around here in the middle of all this, as you can imagine, too. So, but that happens.
Yep. So the boss isn't putting any more questions up. I know, Cam, your time is tight. Are you ready to wrap up? You want to add anything you haven't said yet?
I could do a little closing, if that's all right.
Sure. Yep.
I think clearly in Minneapolis, but I'm hoping that maybe in the country we're at some kind of pivotal historic moment here where everybody recognizes it's time to make a significant change. And I'm sure that this is just a time along a long path towards a more just and peaceful society, and of course, that we're heading towards. But I think people are ready to do it. We could miss the opportunity, and I hope we don't. And I think what I said before is we could actually use the help from everybody in the country who cares about this and in the world. And that help could just be well wishes. You could just send us some good vibes and help us focus our intentions, if you will. But it could also mean your good ideas and your support. And if you have a role to play, let's say in the federal government at all, well, man, we could sure use some resources and some real involvement, because we've sure had the federal government turning away from us and not caring for us for quite a while now, but and beyond. So thank you for giving me a little time to be on here, and hopefully people can track me down if they want to send me ideas or suggestions or anything like that. I'm not that hard to find if you just Google Cam Gordon, Minneapolis City Council.
Thank you, Cam. I really appreciate you coming on and giving us a straight scoop on what's been going on up there, because everybody's paying attention. You're in the national spotlight now.
And one thing I'm just going to claim, we've had Greens on the council since about 97. And if we hadn't had a Green on the council through all this time since I've been through, since 2006, I don't think we'd be nearly where we are now, because we were able to push good things forward. Others saw that they were popular, latched onto them, the people liked it, and we made progress. So it really, really makes a difference if we can grow the Greens and get Greens elected at any level of government. So thank you very much.
We should elect thousands of local Greens as we go into the 2020s. That's how we're going to become a major party. So thanks for doing what you do.
And but also thank you for the compassion and the understanding that you bring to this, because you can feel that. And I really, really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so we normally go for about an hour, so we still have about 15 minutes. And I've been noting some questions I saw in the chat. And if I don't see one flash up on the screen, I'm going to say briefly, somebody asked That's the question. Y'all expect to be on a ballot in all states and territories. We're going for all 51 ballots where we can get electoral votes. And we're also going for the advisory vote in the territory of Guam. It's the only territory that has a presidential vote. And having cousins in Hawaii, Asian Pacific Islanders, one of our hopes was we could do a trip to Guam and leaflet everybody there. And they're really facing the climate crisis. But in this coronavirus thing, I don't know if that's going to happen. But so, yeah, we're working on it. You should go to our website, howiehawkins.us, click on at the top, I think it's just ballot access, and it'll tell you where we are in each state. We're on 24 states now. That's worth 305 electoral votes. A lot of states are in process. We're asking state governments to give us relief from physical petitioning because of the coronavirus situation and public health reasons. And some states have done that. Other states we've had to sue and we've got on the ballot, like Illinois. New Jersey, they settled for electronic signatures. It's only 800 in New Jersey, so we can do. And we're marching through the states, and we haven't given up on any of them yet. So if you're in a state and you want to find out if we're on the ballot, there's a map on that part of the website, so you can see if we're on the ballot. And if we're not in your state, you can hook up with us, and we'll help you get us on the ballot in your state.
Austin Patton is asking, as president, that's for you, what will you do to help smaller towns? Real good question.
Well, as part of our Eco-Socialist Green New Deal, we have a whole program for agriculture and rural reconstruction. And we want to rebuild the soil so they draw carbon out of the atmosphere. And we stop using biocides and chemical fertilizers that kill the soil, pollute the water, and, also contaminate our food. And that requires subsidies to help farmers make the transition. And it requires manufacturing that we put in with our Green New Deal factories so they can use agricultural feedstocks in these towns to manufacture goods. Like, for example, we need plastics that are biodegradable. Right now, we're making synthetic plastics that just break down into microparticles that then get ingested by organisms and move up the food chain, and they're inside us. And they cause problems. Some are carcinogenic, some are mutagenic, some disrupt our endocrine system. And so that's a big part of the Green New Deal. Like in the original New Deal, they had an agricultural program. So we're talking about, for example, parity pricing for all agricultural commodities, not just the big ones that now get price supports, but fruits, vegetables, dairy, as well as those big crops like corn and cotton and soy. And parity pricing means the price support goes up with the cost of production so that every farmer gets the cost of production back plus a living income. And then we would have supply management programs so we don't get gluts in some commodities and shortages in others. That's part of the whole program. So it's really about agriculture being the base for rural reconstruction and the manufacturing associated with it. And we want to expand broadband to all of rural America. We want to expand public transportation to all of rural America. That's all in this Green New Deal. And, the government has neglected rural America like it's neglected urban America. And rural America has been depopulated. People go to the cities, they're poor, and then they become part of the urban problems. So we need to rebuild rural America as well as urban America. And that's what the Green New Deal is focused on.
I Sang is asking, have you watched Michael Moore's newest documentary? If you have, what are your thoughts? I've seen that question a lot, but I haven't had time to watch anything. So
yeah, me too. I got through I think 25 minutes. It's about a 90-minute film, I believe. It's just we're so busy. We got a list that's a mile long of things to do.
I work 10 hours a day. I said I still work 10 between 10. Well, today was 11 hours and 45 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's on our list, and I'm really not prepared to comment on it. I've heard criticisms, but I think I'll wait and watch it myself and make some remarks. And I got people pushing me to write a movie review, so look for that. That's the best I can do at this point. So Frederick Clarkson asks, would you be in favor of increasing the number of Supreme Court justices to rebalance the court as well as reform the federal system since it is a creature of Congress? You want to start with that or you want me to?
I'm thinking of somebody. Yeah. You might want to take that. I was about to say something snarky.
Okay. Well, number one, the Supreme Court is a political animal. And just like we've changed the whole conversation the last 2 weeks by being out on the street about police brutality and racism, what the court does responds to what happens out in the streets and in the world. So, for example, Brown v. Board of Education, I don't believe would have passed, except that the U.S. had to compete with Russia or the Soviet Union at that time for affiliation and support in different countries of the global South. And we couldn't be an apartheid state and get the support of people of color around the world. So that, I think, played a big role in why this country decided it's got to get rid of formal discrimination. And I think that's true of any issue before the court. So that's one thing to say. Another is Bernie Sanders, and there's some constitutional scholars who agree with this, said the president could force the Supreme Court justices to go out on the circuits, the Circuit Court of Appeals. And so you'd have rotating people into the court. And I think that's an idea worth exploring. The idea of expanding the court in order to get favorable people is not only a tough sell. I mean, that's what Roosevelt started to do in the 30s. He got slapped down, but it was a political move. And the court changed its opinions after that threat. That's what I mean. The court is a political animal. So a lot of what the court depends on what's going on in the world, what we are doing in the streets, and who we elect to the other offices of the executive branch and congressional branch. So the Supreme Court is definitely a problem. I think, one change we should have is limited terms. Lifetime appointments is, you get people hanging on. I'm glad Ruth Bader Ginsburg's hanging on, but man, she's really up there and she's got health challenges. And some of these young conservatives they appointed are going to be there longer than they're probably going to live. So it's a big problem, and but it's a political problem too.
All right, I'm not butchering your last name, and I'm usually good at them. Mikey, is it Melasic? Go on and correct me. How will you fight to get on the debate stage? I'm assuming that's you're talking about the big vice presidential and presidential debates. I don't know how, we've been basically doing outreach, reaching out to folks, having dialogues with folks. How will we fight to get on the debate stage?
Well, there are two debate stages. There's the formal one that'll be televised. The dates have already been announced by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which sounds like a government commission. In fact, it's a privately owned nonprofit corporation that the Democrats and Republicans control. And the Greens and Libertarians have sued them for many election cycles. And you go to court and basically the judges say it's a private corporation, we can't do anything. Now, what that commission did is it muscled aside the League of Women Voters back in the late 80s, who had been sponsoring the previous presidential debates as a nonpartisan civic organization, and included third-party candidates like John Anderson. And that's why they formed the Commission on Presidential Debates, to keep other alternatives off. So I think our best bet to get on a formal debate is to get the League of Women Voters to step up, reclaim their rightful place as a sponsor, nonpartisan of a debate, and a good, reasonable criterion for including candidates is, do they have enough ballot lines to get a majority of the electoral votes if they want all those states? If that's the criterion, it'll be the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, Democratic and Republican parties. And we actually got in New York the League of Women Voters to do that when Governor Cuomo didn't want to debate any of us. So 4 of us showed up, the Republican, me and the Green Party, Libertarian, and another independent candidate, and Cuomo didn't. But the League stepped up and went ahead anyway, whereas most of the media organizations in these circumstances, they defer to the star, which in this case was Andrew Cuomo, and they won't do it unless he says, and he gets to determine, what the format is and everything. which he did the previous two times, 2010 and 2014. So I believe, like we did in New York, we might get the national legal women voters to do that. The other stage is the national media. And when we're on the ballot, and we're always going to get the question, I'm already getting it, why are you spoiling the election? And of course, my answer is no, we're not spoiling it. The Democratic Party is spoiling it. There wouldn't even be a spoiler issue if they'd listened to us and gone with what we've been giving them since Ralph Nader ran in 2000, the proven nonpartisan solution to the spoiler problem, which is get rid of the Electoral College and a ranked choice national popular vote for president. And Bill McKibben went to the pages of the New Yorker saying I should drop out so I can campaign for ranked choice voting. He doesn't get it. If we're not in the race, it won't even be raised. I'm not even sure Joe Biden even knows what it is. And I'm certain Trump doesn't know what it is. And most of these journalists maybe don't know what it is, but we're going to make sure they know. And, once they start attacking us, that gives us a platform. We attack back. And I think we got majority programs with majoritarian support, Medicare for all, a full-strength Green New Deal, an economic Bill of Rights, the kind of things that Bernie Sanders got a lot of support for. And so by rights, we should be in the debate. And we're going to do our best to get in that media debate as well. Patricia asks, because I'm going to toss this to you, are you willing to do immigration reform, and if so, how? So
we absolutely are. We absolutely are. I mean, I've said first thing I want to do as vice president is disband ICE completely. We believe, as people and also as a campaign in open borders. And so making sure that people who are taking care, yes, we do support open borders down, Greg's. And make sure that folks that are at the borders are brought in and correct me on this, Howie, or work with me on it, because I know, the spirit of what we're saying. I just want to make sure I get the wording right. But making sure that folks that are already at the borders are brought in and taken care of. And we work on family reunification, most definitely, which is one of my goals with abolishing ICE. And a little bit more than that, Howie.
Well, yeah, I think the first thing is we got to release the people who are in internment camps, reunify the families, and the people camped out at the border who by rights under the law should be able to come in and make their applications and are not. Trump is violating the law. His ass should have been impeached a long time ago for that and a long list of violations. And the Democrats don't have the guts to go after those things. They could have made the case to the American people that this guy's hurting workers and consumers and the environment and threatening peace. And what they did was pathetic in that they made it a national security issue over the Ukraine rather than abuse of Congress and abuse of power and a contempt of Congress. It was, because they didn't really want to impeach him. So that's one thing. Now, when we talk about open borders, it's like what they have within the EU. You just check in. If there's not a warrant out for your arrest, you go about your business, whether it's a vacation, to work, to live, to shop, that's fine, back and forth across the border. And, the problem with trade right now is it's managed by the corporations in their interest with these trade agreements like the USMCA, which is the new NAFTA, and all these other agreements. But labor doesn't have mobility. That border is used to divide the working class. And people like Trump say, oh, these immigrants are coming and taking your jobs. Well, actually not. They're taking the jobs people don't want. The people already here. They're picking the crops. They're doing the dirty work in construction and jobs like that. And the less than minimum wage service jobs. But what that border is used is that low wages in Mexico are used as a hammer to beat the workers on this side of the border. And they say, if you don't accept concessions here, we're moving to Mexico or China or wherever it is. And in the global South, unit labor costs are less than half of what they are in this country. That's used against us. That border is used against working people. So that's another reason to have open borders. And then everybody here, should be given legal status. This undocumented problem is wrong, and everybody should have access to all the services. It's an issue of public health, if nothing else. Medicare in this coronavirus environment should be available to everybody so that they can get tested and if they need be treated. And so immigration is used to divide us. And actually, you know, as a lot of people, Mexican Americans in the Southwest say, we didn't move, the border moved on us back in 1848. And we have family on both sides of the border. And now you make it hard for us to visit and move back and forth. And that's just not right. So, yeah, we have an immigration program. So we've been on an hour and I don't see any more questions. So I think that's the message from our campaign manager, that it's time to call tonight's question and answer session to a close. You have any closing words for people, Angela?
I'm thinking of where people's hearts are, where people's minds are with, you know, we have a rebellion, you know, I'm speaking collectively happening. You know, it takes a different character in every city that it's happening in. And I don't want people to forget that what we're fighting for. And there are folks that are offering really nice sounding response. What I saw, Democrats in kente cloth, I had some feelings about that that I'm not going to share. So just be awake, pay attention. You know, things may sound great that you know, these folks are offering token reforms, but remember, token reforms are how we got to now. And pacification techniques, like, you know, yeah, the letters in the street in Washington, D.C. are cute, but it's not, as activists show, it's not far enough. So basically all I'm saying, folks, is just take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and look beyond the surface of what we're being offered. This is not a time to compromise and accept reforms. We have the ball. Let's keep it going.
And I guess I would leave people with, while we've all been focused on the police and brutality and racism, the efforts in Congress to provide more relief in this coronavirus crisis seem to have stalled, given that misleading unemployment report last Friday. And the Republicans are saying, oh, we don't need to do anything. A lot of problems with that report. The BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, said they had a problem surveying people to get an accurate number. If you look at the analysis of the National Coalition, National Jobs for All Coalition, Google that, and they do a analysis every month. If they look at discouraged workers and other forms of hidden unemployment, like people working part-time and want full-time, unemployment rate in their analysis is over 25%. That's like the Great Depression. Consumers, a lot of people are short of money. They're holding on. They're not spending. They're spending on essentials if they got it. And businesses and investors are not going to invest and create jobs because the demand isn't there. It's too risky. So without a big public investment, we're going to be in this depression for a long time. And meanwhile, we don't have a test, trace, and isolate program. So the coronavirus is still expanding. I think between 21 and 26 states, it's going up. South Carolina, I know, was one of them.
One of them. Yes, it was.
Itself, Angela. So I think we got to look at that. And in that so-called HEROES Act, which was half measure, I called it the Cowards Act for a while, but there was things in there like saving the damn post office and mail-in ballots. We got to fight for this election to even happen where people can vote, because the whole Trump strategy is prevent us from voting. There'll be a coronavirus epidemic going on. We won't be able to mail in. It could suppress the turnout. So there's a lot of things right there, which comes back to when people move from the White House to Congress with their protests, as I'm suggesting they might do. There are a lot of issues we got to address. And so I'll leave that as food for thought for people. And I appreciate people being on, and y'all take care and be safe. That coronavirus thing is no joke, because people really, I've known people going through it. It's debilitating and tough. And sometimes you don't make it. So please be safe out there.
Y'all take care.
Have a good evening.